My name is Margaret Wilson, though everyone has called me Maggie since before I can remember. This is the story of how my grandson's wedding day finally showed my family who I really am. I'd spent decades being the quiet supporter, the one who helped without being asked, who gave without needing thanks. But when I arrived at Jason's celebration and discovered my assigned seat wasn't with my family but tucked away in a dark corner behind a column, I finally understood my place in their lives. What happened next shocked everyone, especially when the venue manager announced who had actually paid for the lavish celebration they were all enjoying. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Pinecrest Gardens was transformed into something magical that Saturday afternoon. The historic stone building with its climbing ivy and sprawling grounds had been Jason's dream wedding venue since he was a child. We'd visit the public gardens when he was little, and he'd point to the grand terrace overlooking the lake and say, "That's where I'll get married someday, Grandma." I'd smile and squeeze his hand, never imagining how that innocent childhood declaration would eventually lead to one of the most profound moments of my life. The May weather couldn't have been more perfect, sunshine warming the air just enough, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of blooming roses from the garden. White chairs lined the immaculate lawn in perfect rows, a white runner creating an aisle between them. An elegant floral arch stood at the front, framing the sparkling blue lake beyond. Crystal vases filled with peonies and lilies adorned each row, catches of ribbon fluttering in the breeze. String musicians played softly as guests in their finest attire found their seats, champagne glasses in hand. I paused at the entrance to the ceremony space, smoothing down my pale blue dress, the one Karen, my daughter, had suggested with a critical eye. "Nothing too bright, Mom. Emily's colors are pastels, and we don't want anything distracting in the photos." The dress was beautiful but deliberately subdued. I'd added my strand of pearls, Robert's gift on our 30th anniversary, 2 years before cancer took him. The small rebellion gave me comfort. I'd followed their instructions in almost everything else as I always did. A young usher approached with a practiced smile. "Welcome to Jason and Emily's wedding. May I have your name, please?" "Margaret Wilson. I'm the groom's grandmother." Something flickered across his face, a moment of confusion quickly masked by professionalism. "Of course, Mrs. Wilson. Let me show you to your seat." He led me not toward the front where family was typically seated, but around the outer edge of the seating area. We passed row after row of chairs, including the first 3 rows where I could see Karen and Michael, divorced but cordial for the occasion, Emily's parents, and various aunts, uncles, and cousins. No empty seat waited for me there. The usher continued toward the very back corner, where a single chair had been placed somewhat apart from the last row, partially hidden behind a decorative stone column. "Here you are," he said, gesturing to the seat where I would barely be able to see the ceremony unless I leaned out awkwardly. "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice steady despite the hurt blooming in my chest. "I'm Jason's grandmother. Shouldn't I be seated with the family?" The young man checked his seating chart again. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Wilson, but this is the assignment I was given." The seating arrangement was finalized by the couple and approved by Mrs. Karen Wilson yesterday. I nodded slowly, taking the information like a physical blow. This wasn't a mistake or oversight. My own daughter and grandson had deliberately placed me in the least visible spot possible on one of the most important family days of our lives. I sat down carefully, feeling every one of my 65 years in that moment. From my position, I could see the guests chatting happily, could see my daughter laughing with Emily's mother, could see distant relatives who visited once every few years seated prominently in the family section. But I, who had been there for every milestone, every triumph, every tearful phone call, was positioned as an afterthought, someone to be acknowledged with the bare minimum of inclusion. What stung most was knowing what they didn't, or perhaps chose to forget. 6 months ago, when Jason had lost his job at the architectural firm due to company-wide layoffs, their dream wedding had seemed impossible. The deposits had been paid, but the remaining balance of $42,000 for the venue, catering, flowers, and music had loomed like an insurmountable obstacle. Emily had been devastated, Karen distraught that her only son would have to settle for something less than he deserved. That night, Jason had called me, his voice tight with the effort of holding back tears. "Grandma, I don't know what to do. We might lose our deposits." Emily's heartbroken. I had made the decision instantly, though I told him I needed to check my accounts and would call him back. The truth was, I'd been quietly building my savings since Robert died. My modest home was paid off, my expenses were minimal, and the small business I'd built creating custom wedding invitations had done surprisingly well over the past decade. I had been saving for my future care needs, determined never to burden my family. But in that moment, Jason's happiness had seemed more important than my own security. The next day, I had called the venue directly, speaking with the manager, David Reynolds. I paid the remaining $42,000 in full, with one condition: that my contribution remain anonymous. Let them think they found a payment plan that worked, I told him. This is my gift to them, but I don't need recognition. David had seemed surprised but agreed to my terms. 2 days later, Jason called me, elated. "Grandma, you won't believe it. The venue manager worked some kind of miracle with our payment schedule. The wedding's back on." The joy in his voice had been all the thanks I needed, or so I'd thought at the time. Now, sitting in my hidden corner as the ceremony was about to begin, that anonymous generosity felt less like selflessness and more like self-erasure. I had made myself invisible financially, and they had made me invisible physically. The pattern was painful to recognize, but impossible to deny. As the string quartet shifted to the processional music and guests rose for the bride's entrance, a man in a tailored suit approached my isolated seat. "Mrs. Wilson?" he said quietly. I looked up to find David Reynolds, the venue manager, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. "Yes, that's me," I replied. "Would you mind stepping away for a moment? There's something we need to discuss regarding today's arrangements." Curious and somewhat relieved for an excuse to leave my corner, I followed him along a side path that led to a small office in the main building. The room was warm and professionally appointed, with photographs of beautiful weddings lining the walls. "Please have a seat," David said, gesturing to a comfortable chair across from his desk. "I noticed your seating assignment when I was doing my final check of the ceremony setup." I settled into the chair, smoothing my dress. "Yes, well, family. Dynamics can be complicated." David's expression became serious. "Mrs. Wilson, I hope you don't find this presumptuous, but I find myself in an ethical dilemma. When you paid for the majority of this wedding, the agreement was that would remain private," I interrupted gently. "And I've honored that," he assured me. "However, I didn't anticipate that the person who ensured this celebration could happen would be seated in what is, frankly, the worst spot in the entire venue. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "As the person who signed the contract and paid the balance, you have certain rights regarding today's event." My confusion must have shown on my face because he continued more directly. "What I'm saying, Mrs. Wilson, is that while this is certainly your grandson's wedding day, legally speaking, this is your event. You are the contract holder. Your name is on the documentation. Your payment secured not just the venue, but all the premium upgrades they're enjoying today." I sat very still, absorbing this information. I never thought of it that way. "Few people do," David acknowledged. "Most assume the person getting married has the final say in all aspects. But from a contractual standpoint, The person who signs and pays has ultimate authority over the arrangements, including seating. The implications of what he was saying slowly dawned on me. For decades, I had accepted my role as the background supporter, the one who gave without expectation, who helped without acknowledgement. I had convinced myself that asking for recognition was somehow selfish or petty. But being physically hidden away on a day that wouldn't even be happening without my contribution, that was a step too far. A line had been crossed. "What are you suggesting?" I asked carefully. David leaned forward slightly. "That decision is entirely yours. I can have your seat moved to where it should be, with the immediate family. I can speak with the coordinator about adjusting the reception seating as well. Or," he hesitated briefly, "we can leave things as they are. But I wanted you to know that you have options." My mind raced with possibilities and their potential consequences. Demanding a new seat minutes before the ceremony would create a scene, draw attention, potentially upset Emily on her wedding day. That wasn't who I was. But continuing to accept invisibility no longer felt like an option either. "Is there a third choice?" I asked, an idea forming. "One that doesn't disrupt the ceremony but still acknowledges truth?" David tilted his head, slightly. "What did you have in mind?" "I understand there are toasts planned during the reception. As the venue manager, would it be unusual for you to say a few words at some point?" A small smile appeared on David's face. "Not unusual at all. In fact, it's fairly common practice for me to welcome guests and say something about the special nature of each celebration we host." "Then perhaps," I said, finding my voice becoming stronger with each word, "the truth could be acknowledged at the appropriate moment without creating unnecessary drama now." David nodded slowly, appreciation evident in his expression. "That could certainly be arranged." As we discussed the details of what would be said and when, I felt something shifting inside me, decades of accumulated silence giving way to the quiet certainty that being valued was not something I needed to earn or beg for. It was something I deserved simply by virtue of who I was and what I contributed to our family. When I returned to the ceremony, slipping back into my corner, seat just as Emily was halfway down the aisle, I viewed the proceedings through new eyes. The hidden spot no longer felt like a punishment, but a temporary situation soon to be remedied. I watched my grandson's face light up as his bride approached, genuinely happy for their joy even as I prepared for the truth to be known. The ceremony was beautiful in its traditional simplicity. Jason and Emily exchanged heartfelt vows under the floral arch with the lake shimmering behind them. I wiped away tears as they kissed, officially becoming husband and wife. Despite everything, my love for them remained uncomplicated and true. As guests migrated to the reception area on the grand terrace for cocktail hour, I made my way there slowly, observing rather than participating. The space had been transformed with twinkling lights, more floral arrangements, and elegant table settings. A string quartet had positioned themselves in one corner, playing gentle melodies that floated above the happy chatter of guests. I located my reception seat at table 14, again, far from the head table where family would sit, placed instead with distant acquaintances and Emily's parents' colleagues. I noted the irony with a calm that surprised me. Soon things would change, not through confrontation or demand, but through simple truth. Karen spotted me as I stood observing the seating arrangement. She approached with the slightly harried expression of a mother of the groom with too many details to manage. "Mom, there you are. Did you see the ceremony all right from your seat?" We had some last-minute changes with the seating when Emily's grandmother needed accommodation for her wheelchair. The explanation was plausible but felt hollow. There had been plenty of space in the family section, wheelchair or not, but I simply nodded, unwilling to create conflict before David had his opportunity to speak. "It was a beautiful ceremony," I said truthfully. "Jason looked so happy." Karen seemed relieved by my apparent acceptance, quickly moving on to direct some issue with the floral centerpieces. I watched her go, feeling a strange mix of love and sadness for the daughter who had never fully seen me. The reception formally began as guests found their assigned tables. From my distant position, I could see the head table where Jason, Emily, and both sets of parents sat, laughing and clinking champagne glasses. The best man gave a heartfelt toast about friendship and future happiness. The maid of honor shared tearful memories of her and Emily's childhood dreams of their wedding days. Then, as dinner was concluding and before the dancing would begin, David Reynolds approached the microphone set up near the small stage where the band was preparing to play. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice warm and professional, "on behalf of Pinecrest Gardens, I want to welcome you all to this beautiful celebration. In my 15 years managing this venue, I've had the privilege of witnessing hundreds of weddings, each special in its own way." The room quieted as guests turned their attention to him. I sat very still at my distant table, my heart beating faster than I cared to admit. What makes each celebration unique isn't just the decorations or the music, but the love and support that surrounds the couple as they begin their journey together, David continued. Sometimes that support comes in ways that aren't immediately visible, but are foundational to the day itself. I could see Karen glancing at her watch, perhaps wondering why the venue manager was taking up time with what seemed like a standard welcome speech. Jason and Emily were listening politely, their hands intertwined on the table. Today's celebration at Pinecrest Gardens would not have been possible without the extraordinary generosity of one person in this room, David said, his eyes finding mine across the distance. When circumstances threatened to derail the plans, for this beautiful day, this person stepped forward and ensured everything could proceed as dreamed. Not for recognition or gratitude, but out of pure love. A curious murmur rippled through the room. I saw Jason straighten in his chair, a look of confusion crossing his face. While I was asked to keep this contribution anonymous, I believe there are times when truth deserves to be acknowledged, David continued. So I want to recognize Margaret Wilson, grandmother of the groom, whose generosity and selflessness made today's celebration possible. The room fell completely silent. Every head turned, searching for me among the tables. I sat up straight, in my blue dress and pearls, no longer hidden in a corner, but suddenly the focus of every eye in the room. Mrs. Wilson not only covered the substantial remaining balance for this entire event when the couple faced financial challenges, but she did so asking for no recognition, no special treatment, not even a seat at the family table. I saw Karen's face drain of color. Jason's expression transformed from confusion to shock to something that looked painfully like shame. Emily's hand flew to her mouth in apparent distress. David raised his glass. So, I'd like to propose a toast to Margaret Wilson, whose love for her grandson took the form of quiet generosity and whose example reminds us all that sometimes the most profound contributions are the ones we don't see until someone points them out. To Maggie Wilson. To Maggie Wilson, the crowd echoed, glasses raised, though most faces still registered confusion or surprise. As David stepped away from the microphone, I saw Jason rise from his seat at the head table. He whispered something to Emily, who nodded quickly, and then he began moving toward my table with purpose in his stride. When he reached me, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Grandma," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Is it true?" I met his gaze steadily. "Yes, Jason. When you told me about losing your job and potentially having to cancel or downsize the wedding, I wanted to help. It was my gift to you and Emily. But it was over $40,000, he said, clearly struggling to process this information. I've been fortunate with my little business, I said simply. And what else would I do with my savings except help the people I love most? He shook his head slightly, as if trying to clear his thoughts. Why didn't you tell us? Would it have mattered? I asked gently. Would knowing have changed where I was seated today? Or has my role as the supportive grandmother who stays quietly in the background become so comfortable for everyone that it's hard to see me any other way? His expression confirmed what I already knew. My invisibility hadn't been malicious, it had been habitual. A pattern so deeply ingrained in our family dynamic that it had become the unquestioned norm. "I'm so sorry," Jason said, the words seemingly inadequate for what he was feeling. "We never meant to make you feel unimportant. You've always been essential to me, to all of us." By this time, Karen had made her way to our table as well, her face a complex mixture of embarrassment and distress. "Mom, why wouldn't you tell us? We would never have—" "Wouldn't you?" I interrupted gently. "Think about it, Karen. When was the last time my input was sought on a family decision? When was the last time my presence was centered rather than accommodated?" My daughter's silence was more revealing than any defense she might have offered. Behind her, I could see Emily approaching, her wedding gown shimmering in the evening light. "Mrs. Wilson," she began, clearly unsure what to call me in this moment of reckoning. I had no idea. The seating, we were told there were limitations with the family section, that compromises had to be made. I smiled at her, feeling no resentment toward this young woman who had simply followed the family's established patterns. "It's Maggie, dear, and today is still your celebration. I didn't want recognition. That's why I made the arrangement with David privately. But I did hope for inclusion." Jason made a sudden decision, turning to the room where guests were still watching our family drama unfold with undisguised interest. "Everyone," he called out, his voice carrying across the terrace. "There's been a change to tonight's arrangements." He turned back to me, extending his hand. "Grandma, would you please join us at the head table where you belong? And—" He glanced at Emily, who nodded immediately. "Would you honor us with the first dance after Emily and I have ours? I think it's time we properly recognize the person who made today possible." The invitation wasn't just to change tables. It was an acknowledgement of a new understanding between us. As I placed my hand in my grandson's and rose to my feet, the guests applauded spontaneously. The sound washed over me like a wave, not just for this moment, but for years of unseen contributions finally recognized. As Jason led me across the room to the head table, I caught David Reynolds's eye. He offered a small, respectful nod, acknowledgement, from one person who understood the value of proper recognition to another. The evening transformed after that moment. I was seated between Jason and his father, my former son-in-law Michael, who seemed as shocked as everyone else by the revelation. Conversation flowed with new awareness, questions about my business that had never been asked before, genuine interest in my life beyond my role as grandmother and mother. When the band played the opening notes of Jason and Emily's first dance, I watched with genuine joy as they moved across the floor, their love for each other evident in every step. And when they finished and Jason came to claim me for the second dance, I felt something shift permanently in our family's foundation. "I've been thinking," Jason said, as we moved slowly across the dance floor, other guests watching with approval, "about all the times you've been there for me that I might not have fully appreciated. The college application essays you helped me edit. The time you drove 4 hours to bring me soup when I had the flu during finals. All the birthdays, holidays, graduations. You never missed a single one." "That's what grandmothers do," I said, though the acknowledgement warmed me more than I could express. "No," Jason said firmly. "That's what you do, and I took it for granted. We all did." He paused as we turned. "I'm going to do better, Grandma." "We all are." As the music ended, Karen approached, asking for the next dance. For the first time in years, I saw my daughter looking at me with new eyes, not just as her mother, the reliable background figure, but as a woman with her own life, resources, and choices. "I had no idea you were doing so well with your business," she said as we moved awkwardly at first, unused to this physical closeness. "Why didn't you ever talk about it?" "You never asked," I replied simply. "And somewhere along the way, I stopped expecting you to." Her face reflected the impact of those words. "I've been self-absorbed, haven't I?" "You've been busy with your own life," I offered, not wanting to condemn, but unwilling to minimize the truth. "But yes, there's been a pattern of assuming I'm fine, I'm there when needed, and otherwise not really seeing me." As the evening continued, I found myself engaged in more meaningful conversations than I'd had with family members in years. Emily's parents sought me out to express their gratitude and embarrassment. "We had no idea," her father said. "We would never have allowed the seating arrangement had we known." "It's not about the money," I explained. "It's about recognizing that I'm still here, still contributing, still part of this family in a meaningful way." By the time the cake was cut and midnight approached, something fundamental had shifted. Not just in how others saw me, but in how I saw myself. The woman who had arrived that morning, accepting her corner seat with resigned dignity, was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that true generosity included being honest about one's contributions and expectations. As the celebration wound down and guests began to depart, David Reynolds approached me one last time. "Was that what you had in mind?" he asked with a small smile. I glanced around at my family. Karen deep in conversation with Emily's mother about plans for Sunday brunch. Jason and Emily directing the cleanup of gift tables, all of them periodically checking in with me, including me in decisions and conversations, in a way that felt both new and right. "It was exactly what was needed," I replied. "Not for recognition of the money, but recognition of me." David nodded thoughtfully. "In my experience, Mrs. Wilson, the most meaningful gifts are those that change how we see each other. You gave your grandson a beautiful wedding, but today, he gave you something too, acknowledgement of your true place in this family." As I gathered my things and prepared to leave, Jason and Emily both insisted on walking me to my car. The night air was cool now, stars visible above the garden trees. "Grandma," Emily said, taking my hands in hers, "I hope you know that our future family events won't repeat today's mistake. Your place is with us, always." Jason nodded, adding, "And I hope you'll let us repay some of what you contributed. Once I find a new position." I shook my head firmly. "The money was a gift, freely given. I don't want or need repayment." I squeezed their hands. "What I want is much simpler. To be seen for who I am, not just what I provide. To be included. Because I matter, not just accommodated because obligation demands it." "We understand now," Jason said softly, "and we'll do better." As I drove home that night, my mind replayed the events of the day, from the corner seat to the center of acknowledgement, from invisibility to recognition. The transformation wasn't just in how my family now saw me, but in how I saw myself. The years of quiet support hadn't been a mistake, but neither was the decision to finally stand in my truth. The grandmother who had accepted being overlooked was gone. In her place was a woman who understood that true family connection requires both giving and receiving, both support and acknowledgement. My corner seat would remain empty from this day forward, not because I demanded attention, but because I finally recognized my own worth and taught my family to see it too. The morning after Jason and Emily's wedding dawned with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I woke early, the events of the previous day still vivid in my mind as sunlight filtered through my bedroom curtains. My modest home felt different somehow, not physically changed, but inhabited by a woman who had finally reclaimed her place in her family's story. I made my coffee and settled at my kitchen table, the familiar morning ritual now accompanied by a stream of text notifications lighting up my phone. The first was from Jason, sent at 6:45 a.m. "Thank you again for everything, Grandma. Not just the financial help, but for all the years of support. Emily and I would like to have you over for dinner next week before we leave for the honeymoon. Your choice of day. The message brought a smile to my face, not just for the invitation, but for the deference to my schedule. In the past, family gatherings had been announced rather than negotiated, with the assumption that I would make myself available regardless of my own plans or preferences. Karen had texted as well. "Mom, can we meet for lunch today? Just us. There's a lot I'd like to talk about." The message was time-stamped 5:30 a.m., suggesting she'd had a restless night. I wasn't surprised. My daughter had always struggled with confronting uncomfortable truths, preferring to maintain appearances rather than address underlying issues. The revelation at the wedding had forced a recognition she couldn't ignore or smooth over with social niceties. I replied to both messages, accepting Jason's dinner invitation for Wednesday and suggesting the small cafe near the park for lunch with Karen. Then I turned my attention to the stack of custom invitation orders waiting on my desk. The business I'd built after Robert's death had started as therapy, a way to fill lonely evenings with creative work, but had grown into something substantial over the years. Wedding invitations, birth announcements, milestone celebrations. My handcrafted paper creations had developed a devoted local following and a growing online clientele. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd built a successful business helping others announce their significant life events, while my own contributions remained largely unacknowledged until yesterday. Perhaps that disconnect had been partly my responsibility. I had become so accustomed to operating quietly that I'd stopped expecting recognition. As I settled at my work desk and began addressing envelopes in the calligraphy style that had become my signature, my mind drifted back to the moment everything had changed. David Reynolds standing at the microphone, publicly acknowledging my contribution. The stunned silence followed by the murmurs of surprise. Jason's face as understanding dawned, followed quickly by shame and then determination to make things right. It hadn't been about the money, not really. The $42,000 had been a significant amount, certainly, but within my means. What had mattered was the pattern it represented. Years of giving without acknowledgement, supporting without recognition, loving without reciprocation. Being seated in that corner, hidden from view at an event that literally wouldn't have happened without me, had simply been the final, undeniable evidence of how I'd allowed myself to be positioned in my family's life. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the frosted glass panel, I could make out a delivery uniform. When I opened the door, a young woman stood holding an enormous arrangement of flowers, roses, lilies, and hydrangeas in soft blues and whites, reminiscent of the wedding decorations but somehow more vibrant. "Margaret Wilson?" she asked, consulting her clipboard. "Yes, that's me." "Special delivery." She handed me the vase, which was heavier than it looked, along with a small envelope. "Someone thinks very highly of you." After thanking her, I carried the arrangement to my kitchen table and opened the card. The handwriting was Emily's. I recognized the looping style from thank you notes she'd sent after showers and engagement gifts. "Maggie, these don't begin to express our gratitude or our regret. What should have been obvious, your central place in our family and celebration, shouldn't have required a public revelation. We are so sorry. With all our love, Emily and Jason." The gesture was lovely, but what touched me most was the signature. "Our family," she had written, not Jason's family. The subtle inclusion spoke volumes about how Emily was choosing to respond to yesterday's events, with grace and a genuine desire to forge a closer relationship. I arranged the flowers in my living room bay window, where the morning sun caught, the water droplets still clinging to the petals, transforming them into momentary prisms. The beauty seemed symbolic somehow, something ordinary becoming extraordinary when seen in the right light. At 11:30, I arrived at Rosewood Cafe for my lunch with Karen. I'd chosen my outfit with more care than usual. A cornflower, blue dress that brought out my eyes, paired with the silver bracelet Robert had given me on our first anniversary. Not dressy, but intentional. Part of reclaiming visibility was acknowledging that how I presented myself mattered. Not because appearance dictated value, but because caring for myself sent a message about how I expected to be treated. Karen was already there, seated at a corner table with 2 water glasses and an anxious expression. She stood when she saw me, an automatic social courtesy that seemed more meaningful today. "Mom," she said, leaning in for a hug that felt slightly awkward. We weren't a physically demonstrative family under normal circumstances. "Thank you for coming." "Of course," I replied, taking my seat across from her. "It's good to see you." She looked tired, dark circles visible beneath her carefully applied concealer. Her blonde hair, dyed to cover the gray that had started appearing in her early 40s, was pulled back in a neat ponytail, her trademark pearls at her throat. Karen had always been conscious of appearances, constructing her image with the same careful attention she'd given to building her career as a hospital administrator. After ordering salad for her, soup, and half a sandwich for me, she got straight to the point, another family trait we shared. "I didn't sleep at all last night," she admitted, turning her water glass slowly between her fingers. I kept replaying everything, not just yesterday, but years of interactions, trying to understand how we got here. "Where exactly do you think here is?" I asked, genuinely curious about her perception. She met my eyes directly. "A place where my mother contributed over $40,000 to my son's wedding without telling me. Where she was seated in a corner like an afterthought. Where it took a venue manager to make us see what should have been obvious." She paused. "A place where you felt so overlooked that you didn't even expect better treatment." The assessment was surprisingly insightful and unflinching. Karen had many qualities: efficiency, determination, organizational skill. But self-reflection hadn't typically been among her strengths. "That's a fair summary," I acknowledged. "Why didn't you say something?" she asked. "About the money, about the seating, any of it?" I considered my answer carefully, wanting to be honest without being accusatory. The money was a gift I chose to give privately. As for the rest, I took a sip of water. At some point over the years, I stopped expecting to be centered in family discussions or decisions. It wasn't a conscious choice, more an adaptation to the dynamic that developed after your father died. Karen flinched slightly at the implicit criticism but nodded. "I took over," she said quietly. "Made myself the decision maker, the organizer, the one who managed everything." "You did," I agreed. "And in many ways, that was necessary and appreciated. You stepped up when the family needed leadership, but somewhere along the way, I stopped consulting you," she finished. "Stopped considering what you might want or need. Started treating you as someone to manage rather than someone to partner with." Our food arrived, creating a natural pause in the conversation. I was surprised by Karen's level of insight. She was seeing patterns I had assumed she was blind to. "After Dad died," she continued once the server had left, "I was so focused on being strong, on making sure Jason had stability. You seemed fragile. I worried about burdening you with decisions or responsibilities." She looked up. But that period passed, and I never adjusted. I just kept assuming control was mine to take. "And I let you," I said, acknowledging my part. It was easier in some ways to step back. Grief can make you retreat from active participation. But I should have reclaimed my place more clearly when I was ready. Karen pushed a cucumber around her plate. "When did you start your business?" she asked suddenly. "The invitation design. When did that begin?" I was taken aback by the apparent change of subject. "About 8 months after your father died." "Why?" 8 months, she repeated. And it's successful enough that you could contribute $42,000 to Jason's wedding without financial strain. She set down her fork. Mom, that's almost 9 years of building something substantial, and I know almost nothing about it. I couldn't even tell you the name of your company. Timeless Impressions, I supplied. And yes, it's done well. I have clients across 3 states now, and the online store has expanded my reach considerably. Karen was shaking her head slowly. See, I didn't even know there was an online store. I've been so wrapped up in my own life, my career, Jason's milestones. I never asked about yours. She met my eyes directly. I've been a self-absorbed daughter, haven't I? The blunt self-assessment surprised me. You've been busy with your own life and responsibilities, I offered, softening the judgment. That's a kind way of saying yes, Karen replied with a sad smile. The truth is, I stopped seeing you as someone with an evolving life. In my mind, you became static. Mom, who would always be there, unchanged, available when needed, but otherwise not requiring attention or consideration. Her insight was surprisingly accurate. I had indeed become a background character in my family's narrative, reliable, but two-dimensional, valued for function rather than presence. What do we do now? She asked after a moment. How do we change patterns that are so established? The question was genuine, her expression open in a way I hadn't seen since she was much younger. This vulnerability from my normally controlled daughter touched me deeply. We start with awareness, I said, which you're already demonstrating. And then we make different choices, consistently, until new patterns emerge. Karen nodded thoughtfully. I'd like to see your studio, she said. Your workspace. I realized this morning I've never actually seen where you create your designs, even though I've been to your house dozens of times. I'd like that, I replied, genuinely pleased by her interest. Perhaps this weekend? Saturday morning? She suggested. I could bring breakfast. As we finished our meal and prepared to leave, Karen hesitated, then reached across the table to take my hand. Another uncharacteristic gesture. I'm sorry, Mom. Not just for the wedding seating, but for years of not seeing you clearly. For taking your support for granted while failing to provide my own. The apology was direct and unqualified. No excuses or justifications. Another surprise from my daughter, who typically defended her actions rather than acknowledging missteps. Thank you, I said simply, squeezing her hand before releasing it. That means a great deal. After paying the bill, Karen insisting despite my protest, we walked to our cars together. The spring air was warm around us, cherry blossoms drifting across the parking lot in small, fragrant clouds. One more thing, Karen said as we reached my car. Jason mentioned repaying some of what you contributed to the wedding. I want you to know I support that. It shouldn't all fall on you, especially not when neither of us properly acknowledged your gift. The money was freely given, I replied. I don't expect or need repayment. Karen shook her head firmly. It's not about what you expect, Mom. It's about what's right. Between Jason's new job prospects and what Michael and I can contribute, we can at least share the burden more equitably. I considered arguing further, but recognized something important in her insistence. Not just financial responsibility, but a desire to restore balance to our relationship. Accepting help from my daughter might be as significant as giving it. We can discuss it, I conceded, but not today. There's time. As I drove home, I found myself thinking about the concept of visibility, how we see others, and how we allow ourselves to be seen. For years, I had accepted a supporting role, convinced that demanding recognition was somehow selfish or unseemly. Yesterday's revelation had cracked that belief wide open, forcing not just my family but me to reconsider what healthy relationships actually entail. True generosity wasn't martyrdom or self-erasure. It was giving from a place of security and strength, with clear boundaries and honest expectations. I had given the financial gift freely, yes, but I had also silently expected better treatment than being hidden in a corner. Acknowledging that expectation wasn't selfish, it was human. My phone chimed with a text message as I pulled into my driveway. It was from David Reynolds, the venue manager whose intervention had catalyzed yesterday's transformation. Hope this isn't overstepping, but wanted to check how you're doing after yesterday's events. In 20-plus years managing celebrations, I've rarely seen such a powerful moment of family recalibration. Wishing you well. His thoughtfulness touched me. I replied after a moment, not overstepping at all. I'm doing well, better than expected. Family lunch today was surprisingly positive. Thank you again for your role in creating necessary truth. Some revelations, while uncomfortable, are essential. Inside my house, I settled back at my work desk, the afternoon sunlight creating ideal conditions for the detailed calligraphy work needed for a retirement party invitation order. As I dipped my pen into the midnight blue ink, I found myself smiling at the connection between my business and yesterday's events, both centered around proper acknowledgement of significant moments. The woman who had accepted a corner seat was gone, replaced by someone who understood that taking up appropriate space in her own life story wasn't selfish but necessary. The artistry with which I created celebrations for others could now extend to the crafting of my own family relationships, with intention, care, and honesty about expectations. My phone rang just as I was completing the last envelope. Jason's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with genuine pleasure. "Grandma," he said, his voice warm. "I'm at Lakeside Park near your house. I was hoping I might stop by for a few minutes. There's something I'd like to talk about." The request itself represented change. In the past, Jason might have simply appeared at my door, assuming my availability. The consideration for my time and schedule was another small but meaningful shift. "I'd love that," I told him. "I'll put the kettle on." 20 minutes later, my grandson sat at my kitchen table, his tall frame seeming slightly too large for the space. At 28, Jason had grown into a thoughtful young man, his father's height combined with Karen's organizational mind, and something uniquely his own, a creative intuition that had led him to architecture. "I keep thinking about what you said last night," he began after accepting a cup of tea, "about wanting to be seen for who you are, not just what you provide." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "It made me realize I don't actually know as much about your life as I should," he admitted. "I know you're my grandmother who makes amazing cookies and never forgets my birthday, who came to every baseball game and graduation. But I don't really know about your day-to-day life, your business, your interests beyond family events." His self-awareness was impressive and somewhat unexpected. Jason had always been perceptive, but like many young adults, primarily focused on his own experiences and challenges. "What would you like to know?" I asked, genuinely curious about what aspects of my life interested him. "Everything," he said, with a small laugh. "But maybe we could start with your business. Mom mentioned it's more successful than any of us realized. I'd love to see what you actually do." I led him to my studio, the converted sunroom at the back of the house where natural light poured in through windows on 3 sides. My work table dominated the center of the room, currently arranged with the calligraphy tools and papers for the retirement invitations. Shelves lined one wall, organized with papers of various weights and textures, ribbons, wax seals, and other materials. The opposite wall featured framed examples of my work, particularly complex or meaningful designs I'd created over the years. "This is incredible," Jason said, moving slowly around the room, examining the tools and materials with genuine interest. I had no idea it was so professional. "I guess I always pictured you at the kitchen table with some colored paper and markers." His honesty made me laugh. "Well, it started that way," I admitted. But once I began getting regular orders, I invested in proper equipment and materials. The quality makes a significant difference. He stopped in front of the computer desk in the corner. You have a website? And an Etsy shop, Instagram, and a small Facebook business page, I confirmed. About 60% of my business comes through online channels now. Jason was shaking his head slowly, a look of amazement mixed with something like embarrassment on his face. Grandma, I don't know whether to be impressed or ashamed. You've built this whole business, this whole life, and I knew almost nothing about it. You never asked, I said gently, without accusation. And I never insisted on telling you. He turned away from the computer to face me directly. That's going to change, he said firmly. I want to know about your life, not just how it relates to me, but all of it. The things that interest you, challenge you, bring you joy. His sincerity was touching. I'd like that very much. Jason continued examining the studio, asking thoughtful questions about my process, business growth, and creative challenges. His architectural training gave him an appreciation for design elements I hadn't expected, and we fell into a surprisingly technical discussion about paper weights and ink absorption properties. You know, he said after a particularly detailed exchange about letterpress techniques, there might be a way to incorporate your expertise into our home renovation plans. Emily and Jason had purchased a 1920s bungalow that needed significant updating, a project they planned to tackle after returning from their honeymoon. What do you mean? I asked, curious. We've been thinking about custom touches that would make the house uniquely ours. He gestured to a framed wedding invitation on my wall, an intricate design featuring hand-painted botanical elements. What if you created something similar that we could frame as artwork? Or maybe designed a personalized house blessing for the entryway? The suggestion wasn't just about utilizing my skills. It was about incorporating my creative expression into their home in a visible, permanent way, another acknowledgement of value beyond utility. I'd be honored, I said, genuinely moved by the invitation to contribute to their home in such a meaningful way. We talked for another hour, the conversation flowing easily between my business, his architecture work, and plans for their home. When he finally prepared to leave, mentioning dinner plans with Emily and her parents, he paused in the hallway. Grandma, there's something else I wanted to discuss. His expression grew more serious. About the money you contributed to the Yao wedding. I started to wave it away. As I told your mother, that was a gift freely given. I don't expect— Please, he interrupted gently. Let me say this. He took a deep breath. Emily and I have talked about it, and we've made a decision. We can't accept that amount as an outright gift, especially given how you were treated at the wedding. Before I could protest again, he continued. We're not going to try to repay it all at once, but we'd like to set up a monthly transfer. Think of it as a low-interest loan if that helps. It's important to us, Grandma. Important to our sense of responsibility and integrity. I studied his face, seeing the determination there. This wasn't just about money, it was about balance, about respect, about establishing a more equal footing in our relationship. Refusing would actually undermine the very shift in dynamics I was hoping to encourage. All right, I agreed, but with one condition. The repayments go into an education fund for your future children, my great-grandchildren. Jason's face broke into a broad smile. That's perfect, he said. Actually, perfect. He hesitated, then pulled me into a hug, one that felt different from the perfunctory embraces we'd exchanged in recent years. This was firm, intentional, conveying genuine emotion. I love you, Grandma, he said, his voice slightly rough. Not for what you give or do, but for who you are. I'm sorry it took yesterday's revelation for me to show that properly. After he left, I returned to my studio to finish the retirement invitations. As I addressed the final envelope, I found myself reflecting on the swift changes yesterday's revelation had initiated. Karen's lunch invitation and genuine remorse. Jason's visit and newfound interest in my life. Emily's beautiful flowers and inclusive note. These weren't superficial gestures born of guilt or obligation. They represented genuine recalibration. My family adjusting their perception of me and my place in our shared story. The invisibility I had accepted for years was giving way to true recognition, not because I had demanded attention, but because I had finally allowed the truth of my contribution, both financial and emotional, to be seen. The corner seat at the wedding had been a symptom of a deeper pattern, one that had defined our family dynamics since Robert's death. In that moment of public revelation, standing up and accepting the toast David Reynolds had offered, I hadn't just changed my family's perception of me, I had changed my own. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across my work table as I collected the finished invitations, carefully packaging them for delivery. Tomorrow would bring Wednesday dinner with Jason and Emily. Saturday morning, Karen would arrive with breakfast and perhaps a new willingness to see me as a complete person, rather than simply her mother. The relationship with my family was evolving, moving towards something more balanced, more authentic, more mutually nurturing. The grandmother who had accepted being overlooked was transforming into a woman who expected and received recognition, not just for what she gave, but for who she was. The journey wasn't complete, of course. Decades of established patterns wouldn't dissolve overnight. But the foundation had shifted, creating space for new perspectives, new interactions, new possibilities. As evening approached, I moved to my living room with a glass of wine, settling in my favorite chair by the window where Emily's flowers caught the last golden light of day. Tomorrow would be another opportunity to build on today's progress. Another chance to be fully present in my own story, neither hidden in corners nor defined solely by what I could provide. The woman who had entered Pinecrest Gardens yesterday, resigned to invisibility, had been transformed, not by anger or confrontation, but by the simple power of truth acknowledged. My place in the family had been reclaimed not through demand, but through revelation of my contribution, yes, but more importantly, of my inherent value beyond utility. The corner seat would remain empty. The woman who belonged there was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood that true family connection requires mutual visibility, respect, and recognition. That wisdom, hard-won through yesterday's painful revelation, would guide me forward into this new chapter. A chapter where being seen clearly was not a privilege to be earned, but a right to be claimed. Wednesday evening arrived with a gentle warmth that hinted at the approaching summer. I spent extra time getting ready for dinner at Jason and Emily's apartment, selecting a teal blouse that Robert had always loved, paired with silver earrings. I'd treated myself to after my business reached its first significant milestone. These weren't choices made to impress, but to honor the woman I had become. A woman who recognized her own worth beyond her roles as mother and grandmother. Their apartment was in one of the renovated textile mills downtown, with exposed brick walls and large windows overlooking the river. When Jason opened the door, the delicious aroma of garlic and herbs greeted me along with his warm smile. "Grandma, you look wonderful," he said, welcoming me with a genuine hug rather than the perfunctory greeting I'd grown accustomed to over the years. "Emily's just finishing up in the kitchen." The apartment reflected their personalities perfectly. Jason's architectural precision in the thoughtfully arranged furniture, Emily's artistic sensibility in the colorful textiles and artwork. I noticed a new addition to their living room wall, a beautifully framed photograph of the three of us from the wedding reception, taken after the revelation and seating change. In it, I stood between them, all of us smiling genuinely. My place in the family visibly restored. Emily emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron over her dress, her dark hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. "Maggie!" she exclaimed, the name still sounding slightly unfamiliar on her lips, but offered with genuine warmth. "I'm so glad you could come." She embraced me with none of the hesitation that had characterized our previous interactions. "Something smells wonderful," I said, following her back to the kitchen. "Can I help with anything?" "Absolutely not," Emily replied firmly. "You're our guest of honor tonight." She gestured toward a glass of white wine already poured at the kitchen island. "Please, make yourself comfortable. Jason can entertain you while I finish the risotto." In the past, I might have insisted on helping despite her protests, falling into the familiar pattern of serving rather than being served. Tonight, I accepted her hospitality with grace, taking the offered wine and settling on one of the bar stools where I could watch her cook while conversing with both of them. "Tell me about the honeymoon plans," I said, sipping the crisp wine. "You're leaving Monday, right?" Jason nodded, leaning against the counter beside me. 2 weeks in Portugal. We start in Lisbon, then head north to Porto, and finish with a few days in the Douro Valley wine region. "It sounds magnificent," I said, genuinely pleased for them. I've always wanted to visit Portugal. Jason and Emily exchanged a quick glance that I couldn't quite interpret. "Have you traveled much, Grandma?" Jason asked, his tone casual, but his expression genuinely curious. "I realize I don't actually know which countries you visited." The question highlighted once again how much of my life remained unknown to my family. "Not as much as I'd like," I admitted. "Your grandfather and I made it to England and Scotland for our 25th anniversary. And after he passed, I took a small group tour of Italy, Florence and Tuscany mostly. That was about 5 years ago." "Italy!" Emily exclaimed, stirring the risotto with practiced movements. "We almost chose that for our honeymoon. I'd love to hear about your trip sometime." "I have a photo album," I offered. "And quite a lot of stories. The tour group was quite colorful." "We should have a slideshow night when we get back from Portugal," Jason suggested. "You can share your Italy pictures, and we can show you our honeymoon photos." The simple invitation to share my experiences, to be the center of attention rather than the appreciative audience for others' adventures, felt surprisingly significant. Dinner was served at their small dining table, elegantly set with linen napkins and candles. The risotto was exceptional, creamy and rich with parmesan and wild mushrooms. "This is delicious, Emily," I said after my first bite. "You're quite a talented cook." She smiled, pleased by the compliment. "I learned from my grandmother, actually. She was Italian, from a small town outside Naples. Cooking was her love language." Her expression softened with memory. "She passed away when I was in college. I still miss her terribly." "Tell me about her," I encouraged, genuinely interested. Emily seemed momentarily surprised by the request, but then launched into warm stories about her grandmother Sophia, her superstitions about cooking, her broken English mixed with passionate Italian, her fierce love for her family. As she spoke, I noticed Jason watching her with tender attention, clearly familiar with these stories, but still touched by them. "She sounds wonderful," I said when Emily finished. "I wish I could have met her." "She would have adored you," Emily replied, with surprising certainty. She always said you could tell a person's character by how they handled both celebration and sorrow. She reached across the table to touch my hand briefly. "You've handled both with such grace." The compliment touched me deeply, especially coming from Emily, whose relationship with me had previously been cordial but somewhat distant. As we finished the meal, Jason cleared his throat slightly. "Grandma, there's something we wanted to discuss with you. A proposal of sorts." "That sounds intriguing," I said, setting down my wine glass. Emily nodded encouragingly to Jason, who continued. "We've been thinking about the house renovation, the bungalow we bought last year. We'll be starting work as soon as we return from Portugal." Yes, I remember. It's a beautiful property with wonderful potential. It is, Jason agreed. But the renovation is going to be extensive. We're essentially gutting the interior to restore the original architectural details while updating the systems and layout. Which means, Emily added, that we'll need to live somewhere else during the construction. We were thinking about a short-term rental, but those are expensive and impersonal. I began to see where this conversation was heading, but waited for them to continue. We were wondering, Jason said, meeting my eyes directly, if you might consider letting us stay with you during the renovation. We expect it will take about 4 months. The request was unexpected. My house, while comfortable, had only 2 bedrooms, my master suite, and the smaller room I'd converted into my studio. Having them stay would mean significant adjustments to my space and routine. We know it's a lot to ask, Emily added quickly, apparently reading my hesitation. And we would absolutely respect your privacy and independence. We could convert your dining room to a temporary bedroom, since it's rarely used. We'd handle our own meals and contribute to household expenses. And, Jason continued, I could finally tackle some of the home maintenance projects you've been putting off. The back deck needs rebuilding, and the master bathroom renovation you've been considering would be a perfect project for me. I took a moment to consider their proposal. In the past, I might have immediately agreed out of a sense of obligation or a desire to be helpful, regardless of the inconvenience to myself. But the woman who had emerged from the corner seat at the wedding recognized the importance of honoring my own needs and boundaries. I appreciate you thinking of me, I said carefully, and I'd like to help if I can. But I do have some concerns about my workspace and privacy. My business requires dedicated space, and my clients often visit for consultations. Rather than immediately offering reassurances or showing disappointment, Jason and Emily exchanged thoughtful glances. What if, Jason suggested, we help convert your garage into a proper studio before we move in? It's got good natural light with those west-facing windows, and I could add proper insulation, heating, and custom storage for your materials. The suggestion showed genuine consideration for my needs rather than just their convenience. The garage conversion was something I'd contemplated for years but had never prioritized. We don't want to disrupt your life or business, Emily added sincerely. If it's not workable, we completely understand. Your home is your sanctuary, and we respect that. Their approach, offering a genuine solution to my concerns rather than simply pushing for what they wanted, represented exactly the kind of relational shift I had hoped would emerge after the wedding revelation. Let me think about it, I said finally. The garage studio is an intriguing idea, and having company for a few months might be lovely. But I'd want to be sure the arrangement would work for all of us. They both nodded, accepting my need for consideration without pressure or disappointment. Of course, Jason said. Take all the time you need. And please be honest about what would make it workable for you. We want this to be positive for everyone if we move forward. As the evening continued, the conversation shifted to their Portugal plans, my upcoming invitation orders, and local news. The potential living arrangement remained present but unforced, allowing space for genuine reflection rather than immediate decision. When I prepared to leave around 9, Jason insisted on walking me to my car, despite my protests that it was unnecessary. The neighborhood is perfectly safe, I assured him as we descended in the elevator. I know, he replied with a small smile, but maybe I just want a few extra minutes with my grandmother. Outside in the mild spring evening, we walked slowly to my car, the streetlights casting warm pools of light on the brick sidewalk. Thank you for coming tonight, Jason said, his tone more serious than it had been upstairs. It meant a lot to Emily, to both of us. I enjoyed it very much, I replied truthfully. You've created a lovely home together. He nodded, then hesitated slightly. Can I ask you something, Grandma? Something personal? Of course. Are you happy? The directness of the question surprised me. I mean, in your day-to-day life, are you fulfilled? Do you have enough connection? Enough purpose? No one in my family had ever asked me such a question before. It was always assumed that I was fine, content with my routines and occasional family interactions. That's quite a question, I said, giving it the consideration it deserved. I have my business, which brings me creative satisfaction and connects me with interesting people. I have my women's book club and my volunteer work at the art center. I paused, reflecting more deeply. There are moments of loneliness, certainly. Times when I miss having someone to share everyday observations with. But overall, yes, I'm content with my life. Jason nodded slowly, considering my response. I've been thinking a lot about attention, he said, about how we distribute it, who we focus on, who we overlook. After what happened at the wedding, I've realized how much I took your contentment for granted, assumed you were fine without really checking. His self-awareness touched me deeply. We all have blind spots, I said gently. Areas where our perception is limited by assumptions or habits. What matters is being willing to recalibrate when those limitations are revealed. Which is exactly what we're trying to do, he agreed. It shouldn't have taken David Reynolds and a public revelation for us to see you clearly. But I'm grateful. It happened. I don't want to go back to the old patterns. We reached my car, and I turned to face him directly. New patterns take time to establish, I said. But the awareness you're showing is the essential first step. He hugged me then, a genuine embrace rather than a perfunctory gesture. Drive safely. Let us know when you get home. As I drove through the quiet streets toward my neighborhood, I found myself contemplating their proposal about staying during the renovation. The old Maggie would have agreed immediately, prioritizing their needs above my comfort or convenience. But the woman who had claimed her place at the wedding reception recognized the importance of honest assessment. Living with Jason and Emily for 4 months would certainly impact my routine and privacy. My home had been my sanctuary since Robert died, arranged exactly as I preferred, my schedule entirely my own. Sharing that space would require adjustments and compromises. Yet there was also potential value in the arrangement. The garage conversion would provide a larger, more professional workspace than my current studio. Having daily interaction with Jason and Emily might deepen our evolving relationship in meaningful ways. And there was a certain symmetry to the idea of providing them shelter while they renovated the home that would become their future. The key difference from past decisions was that I wasn't automatically prioritizing their needs above my own. I was weighing the proposal with genuine consideration for my well-being alongside theirs, exactly the kind of balanced decision-making that had been missing from our family dynamic for too long. By the time I arrived home, I had decided to consider the possibility seriously, but with clear conditions that would protect my needs and boundaries. This measured approach felt empowering, neither immediate acquiescence nor reflexive refusal, but thoughtful evaluation. I texted Jason to confirm my safe arrival, then settled in my favorite chair with a cup of tea, still processing the evening. The framed wedding photo they had displayed prominently in their living room returned to my thoughts, a visual representation of my reclaimed place in the family. Not hidden in a corner, but centered between the bride and groom, my presence, acknowledged and valued. That image seemed symbolic of the broader transformation underway, from invisibility to recognition, from accommodation to genuine inclusion, from assumed availability to requested presence. Thursday morning brought unexpected news. As I was packaging a completed wedding invitation order for shipping, my phone rang with Karen's number on the display. "Mom?" she said, without preamble. When I answered, "I've just heard from Riverside Memorial. Margaret Jenkins passed away last night." The news stunned me momentarily. Margaret had been one of my closest friends for over 30 years. A fellow member of the library board, my regular lunch companion, a source of wisdom and laughter through life's challenges. At 82, her health had been declining recently, but her death still came as a shock. "What happened?" I asked, sitting down at my desk. "Heart attack, apparently. Very sudden." Karen's voice softened. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I know how close you were." Her acknowledgement of my friendship with Margaret represented another small shift. In the past, Karen had paid little attention to my relationships outside the family, treating them as peripheral rather than central to my life. "Thank you for letting me know," I said, still processing the news. "There will be arrangements to help with, I'm sure. Helen will be overwhelmed." Helen was Margaret's daughter, who lived in California and visited only occasionally. "Is there anything I can do?" Karen offered. "I can take some time off work if you need support with the arrangements." The offer was unexpected and touching. "That's very kind. Let me check with Helen first and see what's needed." "Of course," Karen replied. "And Mom, don't hesitate to let me know if you need anything. Practical help or just company. I know she meant a lot to you." After we disconnected, I sat quietly at my desk, memories of Margaret flooding back. Our weekly lunches discussing books and local politics, her wry observations about aging and family dynamics, her fierce intelligence that remained sharp even as her physical health declined. The loss felt profound, not just of a friend, but of someone who had truly seen me as an individual, not defined by my family roles. I reached for my phone again, this time to call Helen. The conversation was brief but meaningful. Her grief evident but controlled as she explained she was booking a flight and would arrive the following day. When I offered to help with arrangements, her relief was palpable. "Would you?" she asked. "Mom always said you were the most organized person she knew. She left specific instructions with her attorney, but I'm not sure I can manage all the details from a distance." "Of course," I assured her. "I'll contact the attorney today and get everything started. Just let me know when your flight arrives and I'll pick you up from the airport." After speaking with Margaret's attorney and making initial calls to the funeral home, I found myself unexpectedly emotional. Not just about losing Margaret, but about the way her death highlighted the importance of being truly seen in life. She had been one of the few people who had consistently recognized my capabilities and contributions, who had treated me as a complete person rather than a supporting character in someone else's story. In the midst of these reflections, my phone chimed with a text from Jason. "Heard about Mrs. Jenkins from Mom. I'm so sorry, Grandma. Emily and I would like to attend the service when it's arranged. Let us know if you need anything at all." The message was followed quickly by another. "Also, no rush on thinking about the renovation stay. Take all the time you need, especially now." Their thoughtfulness, both the condolences and the release from immediate decision-making, represented exactly the kind of considerate attention that had been lacking before the wedding revelation. I spent the afternoon making arrangements for Margaret's service with efficiency born of both professional skill and personal care. Her attorney shared the detailed instructions she had left, specific readings, music, even the reception menu. As I worked through the list, I found comfort in fulfilling her wishes so precisely. This final act of friendship felt meaningful, honoring her by ensuring her last celebration reflected her distinctive personality and preferences. By evening, most of the essential arrangements were in place, awaiting only Helen's arrival to finalize details. Emotionally and physically drained, I made a simple dinner and had just settled on the sofa when my doorbell rang. Karen stood on my porch holding a small cooler and a paper bag. "I thought you might not feel like cooking," she said when I opened the door. "I brought some of that soup you like from Marlene's Deli and fresh bread from the bakery downtown." The thoughtful gesture brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you," I said, stepping back to let her in. "That's very kind," Karen moved to the kitchen with familiar ease, setting down her packages and turning to face me. "You've been taking care of everyone else all day, arranging things, making calls. I thought someone should take care of you for a change." She unpacked the soup and bread, found bowls and spoons without needing direction, and served us both at the kitchen table. It was such a simple act, yet so significant, my daughter recognizing my grief and responding with practical care rather than mere sympathy. "Tell me about Margaret," Karen said as we began eating. "I know you were friends for years, but I realize I never really asked about your friendship." The invitation to center my relationship with Margaret, to discuss my experience rather than moving quickly to practical matters, was another small but meaningful shift. "We met on the library board in 1989, I began, finding comfort in sharing memories. She was the most opinionated, articulate woman I'd ever encountered. Robert used to say she could debate the paint off a wall." Karen smiled, encouraging me to continue. "She never had filters, said exactly what she thought regardless of how it might be received, but there was no malice in her directness, just an absolute commitment to honesty." I broke off a piece of bread, remembering. "After your father died, when everyone else was tiptoeing around my grief, Margaret marched right up to me at the library fundraiser and said, 'This is horrible and unfair, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't. Now, are you coming to lunch on Thursday, or do I need to bring sandwiches to your house instead?'" "That sounds exactly like her," Karen said with a small laugh. I remember her at my graduation party, telling Dad his political views were fascinating if entirely misguided. We continued sharing memories as we ate, the simple meal becoming a kind of impromptu wake for my dear friend. Karen listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest in understanding what Margaret had meant to me. "She was there for all the big moments," I said as we finished eating. "But more importantly, she was there for the ordinary Tuesday afternoons in between. That's what I'll miss most." Karen nodded thoughtfully. "Those everyday connections are so important, aren't they? The people who know what matters to you day to day, not just during celebrations or crises." Her observation showed surprising insight, a recognition of the kind of attention I had often found lacking in our family dynamic. "Exactly," I agreed. Margaret knew about every client project, every book I was reading, every small triumph or frustration. She paid attention to the details of my life in a way that made me feel— I searched for the right word. "Seen," Karen supplied quietly. "She made you feel seen." The simple word captured exactly what Margaret had provided, and what had been missing in my family relationships until the wedding revelation forced a recalibration. "Yes," I acknowledged. "She did." Karen was quiet for a moment, then spoke with careful honesty. "I haven't done that well, have I? Seeing the details of your life, I mean. Even now, I'm trying to do better, but I realize how little I actually know about your daily experiences and relationships." Her self-awareness was touching. "You're making an effort," I said gently. "That matters enormously." After Karen left, promising to help with funeral arrangements the following day, I found myself reflecting on the parallels between Margaret's death and the wedding revelation. Both highlighted the profound importance of being truly recognized, not just during significant events, but in the fabric of everyday life. Both underscored the difference between perfunctory attention and genuine seeing. Margaret had given me the gift of being fully seen throughout our friendship. Now, ironically, her death seemed to be deepening my family's understanding of who I was beyond my roles as mother and grandmother. Karen asking about our friendship, Jason and Emily expressing their condolences and offering to attend the service. These were small but meaningful acknowledgments of my life's connections and losses. As I prepared for bed, I noticed a text from David Reynolds that had arrived while I was speaking with Karen. Heard through community connections about Margaret Jenkins' passing. My sincere condolences. She was a remarkable woman who spoke of you often and with great affection at our chamber events. Please let me know if Pinecrest can assist with reception arrangements. The message reminded me of the unexpected connection that had formed with David through the wedding incident. His intervention had catalyzed the transformation in my family dynamics, and now he was extending professional courtesy during a personal loss. I replied with thanks, noting that the reception was already arranged at Margaret's club as she had requested. Friday morning brought steady rain, the gray skies matching my subdued mood as I prepared to meet Helen's flight. Before leaving, I checked my email to find a message from Michael, Jason's father and Karen's ex-husband. Though our relationship had remained cordial after their divorce, our interactions were typically limited to family gatherings. Maggie, the message began. Karen told me about Margaret's passing. I know how much her friendship meant to you over the years. She was a formidable woman with invaluable insight. I still use the investment advice she gave me back in '98. Please accept my condolences. If there's anything I can do to help with arrangements, don't hesitate to ask. Michael. The message was unexpected but appreciated. Another indication that my personal relationships were being recognized as significant rather than peripheral. Michael had remembered a specific interaction with Margaret from decades earlier and acknowledged its value, a small but meaningful recognition of my friend's impact. As I drove to the airport through the spring rain, I found myself reflecting on the swift evolution in my family's awareness. Margaret's death, though painful, was creating yet another opportunity for them to see me more completely, to recognize the relationships and connections that formed the tapestry of my life beyond family obligations. The woman who had been seated in the corner at the wedding was continuing to emerge into full visibility, not through demands or confrontation, but through circumstances that revealed the richness and complexity of her life. Each day brought new opportunities for recalibration, for establishing patterns of mutual recognition and respect that honored the truth of who I was rather than the limited role I had previously accepted. Helen's flight arrived on schedule, her tall figure immediately recognizable despite the years since her last visit. She resembled Margaret strongly, the same direct gaze and decisive movements, though softened by grief today. We embraced briefly. In the arrival hall, words unnecessary between two women connected by love for the same remarkable friend. "Thank you for coming to get me," she said as we walked toward the parking garage. "And for handling everything so efficiently. Mom always said if you wanted something done right, Maggie Wilson was the person to ask." "She was equally reliable," I replied, memories flooding back. "Remember when your father was ill and she organized the entire neighborhood meal rotation? Without being asked? 28 different families bringing dinner over the course of his treatment." Helen nodded, smiling despite her sadness. "That was Mom. Practical help, no fuss about it." As we drove back to town, Helen shared updates about her family, her children now in college, her work as a university administrator, the recent renovation of their California home. I found myself responding with more details about my own life than I might have previously shared, including my business growth and Jason's recent wedding. "Mom mentioned something about that," Helen said, her expression thoughtful. She said, "There was some sort of seating issue? That you ended up making quite an impression." I was surprised Margaret had heard about the incident, though I shouldn't have been. She had always maintained an impressive network of local connections. It was a complicated situation, I acknowledged, not wanting to center my experience during Helen's grief. Everything worked out in the end. Helen's direct gaze, so like her mother's, assessed me carefully. "Mom said it was more than worked out. She said you finally stood up for your proper place in the family. She was quite proud of you, actually." The knowledge that Margaret had not only heard about the wedding incident, but had interpreted it as positive growth, brought unexpected comfort. She had always encouraged me to claim more space in my relationships, to expect the recognition she believed I deserved. "She was a good friend," I said simply, emotion making further elaboration difficult. "The best," Helen agreed, "and she valued your friendship enormously. I hope you know that." As we continued toward town, the rain easing to a gentle mist, I felt profound gratitude for Margaret's presence in my life, for the way she had consistently seen me clearly and encouraged me to expect that same recognition from others. Her death was a significant loss, but the legacy of her friendship remained in the standards she had helped me establish for healthy relationships. The corner seat at the wedding had marked a turning point in my family dynamics. Margaret's passing now offered another opportunity for growth, a chance for my family to recognize and honor the connections that mattered to me, to see my grief as significant rather than peripheral. Each day seemed to bring new moments of potential transformation, new opportunities to establish patterns of mutual visibility and respect. The woman who had emerged from that corner seat continued to evolve, claiming her rightful place not just within family celebrations but within every aspect of her life. Margaret's death, though painful, was another step in that ongoing journey, another chance to be fully seen and valued for all that I was, rather than just what I could provide. The funeral service for Margaret Jenkins took place on a bright Tuesday morning, the spring sunshine feeling almost inappropriate for the occasion. St. Michael's Episcopal Church, where Margaret had been a member for over 50 years, was filled to capacity, a testament to the many lives she had touched with her sharp wit and generous spirit. I sat in the second row with Helen, having helped coordinate every detail from the flowers to the program layout, ensuring that Margaret's final public moment reflected the dignity and thoughtfulness she had embodied in life. Jason and Emily arrived early, finding me in the vestibule where I was greeting arrivals and directing the ushers. They both wore conservative dark clothing, their presence a meaningful gesture of support that still surprised me despite the recent changes in our relationship. "Grandma," Jason said quietly, taking my hand, "the church looks beautiful. Mrs. Jenkins would have approved." "Thank you for coming," I replied, genuinely touched by their attendance. In the past, they might have sent flowers or a card, acknowledging my loss from a distance. Today, they stood beside me, recognizing that Margaret's death was a significant loss deserving of their presence. Karen arrived next, carrying a guest book she had thoughtfully purchased when she learned the funeral. Home had forgotten to provide one. "I thought Margaret's family would want a record of everyone who came," she explained, setting it up on the entry table with efficient movements. Her initiative, anticipating a need and addressing it without being asked, represented exactly the kind of practical support Margaret herself would have offered. The service was moving in its simplicity, following Margaret's explicit instructions with readings from Mary Oliver and Wendell Berry, her favorite poets. The eulogy, delivered by the library board president, captured Margaret's fierce advocacy for literacy programs and her impatience with bureaucratic inefficiency. When he recounted her famous confrontation with the county commissioner over funding cuts, "Sir, if you can't see the value of children having access to books, then frankly, I question your fitness for office." Gentle laughter rippled through the congregation, the kind of honest response Margaret would have appreciated. During the reception at Margaret's club afterward, I found myself surrounded by familiar faces from various aspects of my life: library board colleagues, fellow business owners from the downtown association, members of the garden club Margaret had dragged me into years ago. As I moved through the room, accepting condolences and sharing memories, I noticed my family's subtle but significant presence. Karen stood near the coffee service, quietly ensuring cups were refilled and empty plates cleared. Jason and Emily circulated among the guests, introducing themselves as my grandson and granddaughter-in-law, engaging in genuine conversations about Margaret's impact on the community. David Reynolds attended as well, representing the Chamber of Commerce where Margaret had served on the development committee. He approached me during a quiet moment, offering a warm handshake. "Your friend was quite a force," he said with genuine admiration. Last year, she convinced the chamber to fund a scholarship program for local students pursuing library science degrees. When someone suggested the amount was too ambitious, she simply said, "Then we'll work harder," and proceeded to personally secure half the funding within a month. "That sounds exactly like Margaret," I replied, smiling at the memory of her determined fundraising efforts. She never accepted limitations when she believed something was important. David nodded thoughtfully. "She spoke about you often at our meetings, your business acumen, your community involvement, your dedication to craft. She was immensely proud of your friendship." His words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Margaret had always been direct in her praise when we were together, but learning she had spoken well of me to others added another dimension to our relationship's value. "Thank you for telling me that," I managed. "And thank you again for what you did at the wedding. Margaret knew about it, you know. She said it was about time someone helped me claim my rightful place." David's expression softened. "She was right. Sometimes we need external perspective to recognize patterns we've grown too accustomed to seeing." He paused, then added, "I hope the family dynamics continue to evolve positively." "They are," I assured him, glancing across the room, where Karen was now engaged in conversation with Helen, offering to help with the house clearing process. Slowly, but genuinely. After the reception concluded and most guests had departed, my family gathered around me in the parking lot. The day had been long and emotionally draining, yet their presence provided unexpected comfort. "Let us take you to dinner," Emily suggested. "You've been taking care of everyone else all day. It's time someone took care of you." The echo of Karen's words from a few nights earlier wasn't lost on me. This recognition of my needs, this reversal of our typical dynamic, was becoming more natural for them. "That's kind of you," I began, default politeness kicking in. "But..." "No buts," Jason interrupted gently. "You've organized this entire memorial, supported Helen, greeted every guest. Let us do this for you." Their insistence was loving rather than demanding. I found myself accepting, allowing them to guide me to their car, relieved to let someone else make decisions for the remainder of the day. Over pasta at Giovanni's, our conversation wandered from memories of Margaret to updates about the house, renovation to Emily's latest work project. The flow was natural, incorporating my experiences and perspectives as seamlessly as theirs. When I mentioned feeling overwhelmed by the upcoming task of helping Helen sort through Margaret's belongings, they immediately offered assistance. "I can take time off work," Karen said without hesitation. "Estate clearing is emotionally difficult. You shouldn't do it alone. And we can help with any heavy lifting or transport," Jason added. "Just let us know when Helen plans to start." Their offers felt genuine rather than obligatory. A family rallying around one of its members during a difficult time, recognizing that my friendship with Margaret made this loss personal and significant. Later that week, as I worked with Helen, to sort through Margaret's house, I discovered a letter addressed to me among her important papers. Helen handed it to me with a knowing look. "Mom updated her will last year," she explained. "She said there were some specific bequests she wanted, handled personally." I opened the envelope with careful fingers, finding Margaret's distinctive handwriting covering 2 pages of cream-colored stationery. "My dear Maggie," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then I've finally stopped talking, something many thought would never happen. First, let me say what I've told you countless times. Your friendship has been one of the great joys of my life. Now to business, because you know I never could resist being practical even from beyond." The letter went on to detail several bequests, her collection of first edition poetry books, for someone who actually reads them, not just displays them, her antique writing desk, where countless letters were written, including many to you, and most surprisingly, a substantial monetary gift designated specifically for expanding my business, Because your talent deserves proper investment, and I refuse to let death prevent me from being a silent partner in your success." The generosity overwhelmed me, but it was the personal message at the end that brought tears. "I've watched you build a beautiful life and business while somehow convincing yourself to remain in others' shadows. The incident at your grandson's wedding, yes, I heard all about it, wasn't just about seating arrangements. It was about finally claiming your rightful space in the world. Keep claiming it, my friend. Your worth isn't measured by what you provide for others, but by who you are. A woman of creativity, intelligence, and profound kindness who deserves to be seen and celebrated. With all my love and highest regard, Margaret." Helen, who had tactfully busied herself in another room while I read, returned to find me wiping away tears. "She thought the world of you," Helen said softly. "Used to say you were one of the few people who matched her for backbone, even if you hid it better." "She saw me," I said simply. "Really saw me?" Helen nodded. "And she wanted others to see you too. I think that's why she was so pleased about what happened at the wedding. She said it was like watching a butterfly finally spread its wings completely." The analogy made me smile through my tears. Margaret would appreciate being proven right. Even in death, her final gifts, both practical and symbolic. Resources to expand my business, yes, but also encouragement to continue expanding my presence in the world. That evening, I called a family meeting at my house, something I had never done before. In the past, gatherings had been organized by Karen or occurred around other events. This time, I set the agenda, invited them to my space, and prepared to share my decisions about both Margaret's bequests and Jason's renovation proposal. They arrived promptly, Karen with wine, Jason and Emily with dessert from the French bakery downtown. We settled in my living room, the space I had carefully curated over the years, but rarely shared as a hostess rather than a visitor to others' homes. "Thank you all for coming," I began, feeling oddly formal but wanting to establish this as a purposeful gathering rather than a casual visit. "I have several things to discuss, and I wanted us all together." The focused attention they gave me, phones silenced, bodies turned toward me, expressions attentive, still felt new despite the weeks since the wedding incident. I was leading this conversation, and they were genuinely listening. First, about Margaret's estate. She's left me several bequests, including funds designated for expanding my business. I've decided to use this gift to launch the professional studio conversion we discussed, but with a modification. I looked at Jason. Rather than converting my current garage, I'd like to build a proper studio addition. This would create dedicated workspace while preserving parking and storage. Jason's eyes lit up with professional interest. "That's definitely doable. Actually, it might be more cost-effective than retrofitting the garage, and you could design it specifically for your needs." "Exactly," I agreed. "Which brings me to your renovation housing request. If we time things correctly, the studio addition could be completed just as your renovation begins. I would be willing to have you stay here during your construction with clear agreements about space, responsibilities, and duration." Emily leaned forward eagerly. "That would be amazing, Maggie. What kind of agreements are you thinking about?" I had prepared for this question, even writing out my thoughts to ensure clarity. Respect for my work schedule and client meetings. Shared responsibility for household maintenance. Clear communication about visitors and social activities. And a defined move-out date to prevent the arrangement from becoming indefinite. "Those all sound completely reasonable," Jason said immediately. "We could put everything in writing if that would make you more comfortable." His suggestion showed respect for my boundaries rather than offense at my conditions, another positive shift from the assumptions that had characterized our previous dynamics. "I'd appreciate that," I replied. "Not because I don't trust you, but because clarity prevents misunderstandings." Karen had been quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke. "Mom, "This is a big decision. Are you sure you're comfortable with it?" Her concern seemed genuine rather than patronizing, checking on my well-being rather than questioning my judgment. "I've given it considerable thought," I assured her. "With the studio addition, I'll maintain my professional space. And honestly, having company might be nice. The house feels quite empty sometimes." The admission was more vulnerable than I typically allowed myself to be with family. In response, Emily reached over to briefly squeeze my hand. "We'll make sure it's a positive experience," she promised. "For all of us." The conversation continued, with practical planning, timelines, contractor recommendations, design possibilities. But underneath the logistics, I sensed a deeper shift. This wasn't just about construction projects or temporary housing. It was about building new patterns of interaction, ones where my needs and boundaries were discussed openly rather than assumed or overlooked. As the evening wound down, Karen lingered after Jason and Emily left, helping me carry glasses to the kitchen. "You're different," she observed, not critically, but with curiosity. "More present. More willing to state what you want." I considered her words while rinsing wine glasses. "Margaret's death reminded me that life is finite," I said finally. "She lived authentically, said what she meant, claimed her space without apology. Her final letter encouraged me to do the same." Karen nodded slowly. "The wedding seating incident started something, didn't it? A kind of awakening?" "More like a catalyst," I corrected gently. "The potential was always there. It just needed the right moment to emerge fully." "Well," she said, drying her hands on a kitchen towel, "I'm glad it happened. Even if I'm embarrassed, it took public embarrassment to make us really see you." She paused, then added more quietly, "I like this version of you. The one who calls family meetings and sets clear boundaries and builds additions to her house." Her approval, while appreciated, wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was my own recognition of my worth, my own commitment to visibility and authenticity. The corner seat at the wedding had been a wake-up call, but the true transformation was internal, a decision to stop accepting less than I deserved, whether in seating arrangements or life arrangements. Over the following months, the changes, initiated by the wedding incident and deepened by Margaret's death, continued to unfold. The studio addition rose steadily behind my house, its design reflecting both my practical needs and creative aspirations. Abundant natural light, custom storage for materials, a dedicated client consultation area. Jason oversaw the construction with meticulous attention, consulting me on every decision rather than making assumptions about what I would prefer. As the renovation of their bungalow began, and Jason and Emily moved into my guest room, we established routines that honored everyone's needs. They cooked dinner twice a week, genuine contributions rather than grudging obligations. I maintained my work schedule without apology, and they respected my client meetings with impressive consideration. Our evening conversations ranged widely, from business strategies to travel dreams to family history they had never thought to ask about before. The most profound change, however, was in how family gatherings evolved. At Thanksgiving, I found myself seated at the center of the table rather than at the end, my contributions to the meal celebrated rather than simply expected. At Christmas, Karen insisted on hosting at my house because Mom's new studio is perfect for gift wrapping, but really because she had learned to appreciate my space as a family center rather than just a backup location. When Jason and Emily's renovation completed and they prepared to move back home, the farewell dinner they hosted included a toast that brought tears to my eyes. "To Grandma Maggie," Jason said, raising his glass. "Who taught us that true family means seeing each other clearly, valuing each other fully, and sometimes needing a public intervention to recognize what should have been obvious all along." The laughter that followed was warm rather than uncomfortable, the kind of honest acknowledgement that Margaret would have appreciated. We had moved beyond the corner seat incident itself to embrace its deeper lessons about visibility, worth, and the courage to claim one's rightful place. A year after the wedding, as I prepared invitations for Jason and Emily's housewarming party in their beautifully restored bungalow, I paused to reflect on the journey. The corner seat remained empty, a ghost of a dynamic that no longer existed. In its place was something richer, relationships built on mutual recognition, respect earned through honest communication, and a family that had learned to truly see all its members. My business had expanded with Margaret's investment and the professional studio space, taking on higher-profile clients and more ambitious projects. But more importantly, I had expanded too, into the full space of my own life, no longer willing to accept shadows when sunlight was available. The woman who had arrived at Pinecrest Gardens that spring day, resigned to her corner seat, had been transformed not by anger or demands, but by the simple insistence on truth. The money spent on the wedding had been significant, but the real value lay in the revelation it precipitated, that being truly seen was not a luxury, but a necessity, not selfish but essential to genuine relationship. The corner seat had been a symptom of a deeper pattern of invisibility I had unconsciously accepted. Its exposure had catalyzed a transformation that touched every aspect of my life, from business success to family dynamics to personal confidence. Margaret's death had deepened this change, her final gifts both practical and philosophical, encouraging continued growth toward full authenticity. As I addressed the last invitation, my calligraphy flowing smoothly across the premium paper, I smiled at the journey's unexpected gifts. Sometimes the greatest transformations begin with the smallest moments of injustice, a corner seat at a wedding that reveals a lifetime of being overlooked. And sometimes, claiming your rightful place requires nothing more than the courage to stand up and be counted, to insist on visibility when invisibility has become the comfortable default. The grandmother who had funded the wedding from the shadows had emerged into the light, not seeking attention, but refusing invisibility, not demanding constant recognition, but expecting basic respect. The balance felt right. A life lived fully, in all its dimensions, relationships built on mutual seeing, and a family that had learned together that love means making space for everyone at the table, literally and metaphorically. The corner seat would forever remain empty. The woman who belonged there had claimed her rightful place in the center of her own story, surrounded by family who had finally learned to see her clearly. Sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the simple truth that everyone deserves to be seen, and the courage to insist on that visibility when it has been too long denied. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.